"Land that helicopter or you'll be arrested." That's what the self-appointed HOA sheriff screamed while a rescue helicopter circled above my property, trying to save an injured child. Clipboard in one hand, fake badge in the other. Linda Greaves planted herself right in the middle of the landing zone as if her imaginary HOA airspace law mattered more than a kid's life. The rotor wash whipped her hair into a frenzy, but she just stood there, barking threats about illegal air traffic while paramedics begged her to move. Neighbors shouted, cameras rolled, and a boy's breathing got weaker by the second. She thought she was enforcing order. In reality, she just lit the fuse on her own destruction, a chain of events that would bring SWAT, the FBI, and her entire crooked HOA empire crashing down. By the way, where are you watching from? And what time is it right now? 3 months before Linda Greaves tried to stop a medevac helicopter with nothing but a clipboard and her own delusions. It was just a quiet Tuesday morning, the kind of Arizona morning where the sun was already glaring down with that dry, merciless heat by 8 a.m. Cicadas buzzed like static in the mesquite trees, and the air smelled faintly of wet earth from the garden. For a while, I could almost pretend life was simple again. I was out in the orchard with my kids, Josh and Emily, tending to the peach and apple trees my late wife, Claire, had planted before she passed away. Claire used to say, "These trees will grow along with the kids, so they'll always have something to come home to." I'd promised her I'd keep that orchard alive no matter what. Josh, 12 years old and growing like a weed himself, had the garden hose aimed like he was putting out a fire, making sure every root got its share. Emily, 9, sat cross-legged in the grass near the sprinkler, letting the spray tickle her toes and giggling as she tried to catch water droplets in her hands. The sound of their laughter mixed with the hiss of the irrigation line. It was one of those moments you wish you could bottle up forever. That was when the peace shattered. "Excuse me, sir? Daniel Price, I presume." The voice was sharp, nasal, and carried the smug confidence of someone who thought she was the law, the judge, and the executioner all rolled into one. I turned toward the driveway and saw her, a woman in her early 50s, marching across my lawn like she was leading a parade no one else had agreed to join. She was dressed in khaki slacks, a pale blue blouse buttoned all the way to her chin, and a wide-brimmed visor. Tucked under her arm was a clipboard, and at her hip dangled a measuring tape like some kind of suburban gunslinger's holster. The name tag on her chest read L. Greaves, HOA Compliance Officer. Linda stopped 2 feet away from me and adjusted her glasses like she was preparing to deliver a diagnosis no one wanted. "You are in violation of Article 9.2 of the Coyote Ridge Estates Community Standards," she announced. "Your fruit trees exceed the 4-foot height restriction along property boundaries." I just stared at her for a second, making sure I'd heard right. "Ma'am, this house was built in 1991. Claire and I bought it 5 years ago, long before this HOA even existed. These trees have been here since the 90s. Josh had stopped watering and was edging closer to me, his eyes narrowing at this stranger barking orders in our backyard. Emily was still giggling at the sprinkler, oblivious, which was probably for the best. Linda ignored my point entirely and began scribbling something on her clipboard, her pen strokes exaggerated like she was signing a royal decree. Mr. Price. The Coyote Ridge HOA was formally incorporated in 2020. Our standards apply retroactively to all properties within our boundaries. You have 48 hours to remove the non-compliant vegetation or face a $500 fine. Her gaze traveled over the orchard, the raised beds, even the compost bin, like she was trying to decide which part of my yard offended her the most. "And just so you're aware," she added with relish, "I'll be conducting a full property assessment in the coming weeks to ensure complete compliance." I opened my mouth to argue, but she was already turning away, her visor bobbing like the prow of a ship. She walked off with the satisfied stride of someone who thought they'd just scored a victory. That evening, after I'd put the kids to bed, I found an envelope in my mailbox. I assumed it was the violation notice she'd promised, but it was worse, much worse. It wasn't just a fine. It was a summons to county court for serious urban planning violations. The language was so stuffed with legal jargon and official-sounding codes that for a moment I wondered if maybe I was in trouble. But then I thought about Claire, about her planting these trees with Emily strapped to her back, about the day she'd told me, No matter what happens to me, keep this garden going. It's the heart of our home. No HOA, especially not one run by a power-drunk woman with a measuring tape, was going to strip away what Claire had left behind. The next morning, with a mug of black coffee in hand, I sat at the kitchen table and started digging into who exactly Linda Greaves was. What I found made my stomach twist. Her Facebook profile was like peering into the mind of a hall monitor who never grew out of middle school. Post after post documented violations in our neighborhood: grass half an inch too long, mailboxes painted in unauthorized colors, Halloween decorations left up too long. She wrote each post like it was a public service announcement, often attaching grainy, over-zoomed photos. Then I found our pictures. There were shots of Josh shooting hoops in the driveway, Emily drawing chalk flowers on the sidewalk, one of me unloading bags of compost from the truck, and then, buried among the posts, the one that made my hands clench around my coffee cup until it threatened to crack, a photo of Emily, taken through her bedroom window as she got ready for school. The caption read, "Privacy starts with proper window treatments. Community standards apply even to children's rooms." 40 people had liked it. 40 neighbors, or so-called neighbors, thought it was fine for a middle-aged HOA officer to photograph a 9-year-old through her window. That was when I realized this wasn't about fruit trees. It wasn't about property values or community aesthetics. This was about control. About a woman who had found a legal-looking excuse to pry into people's lives and play petty dictator. And if she thought I was going to roll over, she'd picked the wrong dad to mess with. The next step was clear. I needed to figure out just how far her obsession went. And I knew exactly who to call. Marcus Hill lived 2 streets over with his grandmother, Edna. He was one of those quiet geniuses you never hear about until you need them. A drone engineer who could build surveillance gear out of spare phone parts and duct tape if you gave him an hour. We hadn't talked much outside of neighborhood barbecues, but I knew he'd had run-ins with Linda before. When I called him, he didn't even sound surprised. "Dan, I've been wondering when you'd reach out about her," he said, his voice carrying a hint of weary amusement. "She's been harassing my grandmother for months, says her rose bushes are aggressively fragrant." "Marcus," I said. She took a picture of Emily through her bedroom window. "I'm not letting this slide." He went quiet for a moment, then sighed. "Come by my place tomorrow. I've got something you need to see." The following afternoon, I stood in Marcus's garage, surrounded by drone parts, half-built circuit boards, and monitors showing live aerial feeds of different properties. Edna was out back tending her roses, humming to herself, unaware that her garden was apparently a national security threat in Linda's eyes. Marcus turned his laptop toward me and hit play on a video. It showed a bird's-eye view of our neighborhood, captured from one of his drones. "See those?" he said, zooming in on tiny black dots mounted in trees, on utility poles, even hidden inside decorative lampposts. "Those are cameras," he continued. "Wireless, weatherproof, night vision, and guess whose property has the most coverage?" I leaned closer, my stomach knotting. "Yours," he said flatly. It hit me like a punch. She wasn't just taking the occasional picture. Linda had built a network to monitor us, not just me, but other families, especially ones with kids or elderly relatives. Recording someone on private property without consent was a felony in Arizona. Every one of those cameras could mean thousands in fines and prison time. And now, thanks to Marcus, I had proof. I looked at him and said, "Marcus, it's not just about me anymore. She's watching everyone." He nodded grimly. "And the worst part, this is just the surface. I think she's been at it for years. I didn't know it then. But that was the moment the war really began." Marcus leaned back in his chair, rubbing his forehead like he was debating whether to even tell me the rest. "Dan, I've seen a lot of shady stuff in my line of work, but this is organized. She's not just nosy, she's running a full-blown surveillance operation under the cover of an HOA." I frowned. "But why? What's the endgame here? If she hates trees and gardens so much, she could just hand out fines and move on." Marcus tapped the side of his laptop. "Because it's not about the fines. It's about control. And maybe leverage. If you know enough about someone's life, their routines, their secrets, you can pressure them into doing what you want." That made my stomach turn. I glanced at the paused video, frozen on a shot of one of those black dots in a mesquite tree bordering my property. The idea of her sitting somewhere, watching my kids play in their own yard like they were part of her private TV show, made my skin crawl. I asked the obvious question, "Have you gone to the police?" Marcus gave a bitter laugh. "I tried. Once. 3 years ago. I got pulled over for driving suspiciously in my own neighborhood. 6 hours in county lockup while they tore my Tesla apart looking for drugs. Didn't find a thing, but the damage was done. After that, I keep my head down. Cops around here, let's just say they don't make a big distinction between the good hills and the bad ones." His words hit me hard, but then he pointed to the camera feed again. "But this filming kids in their bedrooms, blocking out old ladies' yards, this is different. This is something I will help with." That night, I went home and checked every inch of Emily's bedroom window. Sure enough, there it was, a tiny matchbox-sized camera, mounted in the old oak tree just outside, painted to match the bark. Screws weathered from months of sun and rain. I stood there with that little black eye in my hand, the wind rustling through the branches, and I realized something that made my jaw tighten. Linda hadn't just started this when the HOA moved in. She'd been watching us since the day we arrived, waiting, taking notes. Claire used to tell the kids that home was the one place in the world they'd always be safe. And here was this woman, turning our refuge into a fishbowl. I called Marcus at 7 the next morning. "We've got to take this further." He hesitated. "Dan, you're asking me to go up against someone who has her hooks in the whole neighborhood and probably in the county too." "I know," I said, "but this isn't about fighting the HOA anymore. This is about protecting kids." Marcus was quiet for a beat, then let out a long sigh. "Bring the camera over." When I got to his place, Edna was in the garden again, trimming roses. I couldn't help thinking about how Linda had complained about their aggressive fragrance. The irony of a woman planting spy cameras while whining about the smell of flowers wasn't lost on me. Marcus took the device from my hand and examined it like a jeweler inspecting a diamond. High-end, 6-month battery life, wireless transmission, night vision. Somebody spent real money on this. He glanced up at me. "This isn't some nosy neighbor with a Ring doorbell. Dan, this is tactical. This is federal-level stuff." That gave me an idea. I called the only law enforcement officer I trusted, Deputy Miguel Alvarez. We'd gone to high school together, played on the same football team. If anyone would hear me out, it was him. We met at the county courthouse. I showed him the camera, the drone footage, and a map Marcus had put together marking all the known devices. Alvarez whistled low. "In Arizona, recording someone on their private property without consent is a felony. 10 grand per device, plus 2 years in prison each. And with this many cameras, we're talking 6 figures in damages. Easy." I felt a spark of hope until he added, "Problem is, Linda's been cozying up to the right people. Sheriff's re-election campaign, mayor's charity events. She's made herself useful. You want to take her down. You'll need evidence so strong it can't be buried." That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table, thinking about Claire, thinking about the way Emily's face lit up when the peach blossoms came in. And I decided we weren't going to wait for Linda to slip up on her own. We were going to make her the next day. I called Marcus. "I've got an idea. We give her exactly what she wants, a chance to catch me breaking the rules. And we make sure every illegal thing she does in the process is caught on camera." Marcus's slow grin told me he was in. But before we could set the trap, we needed to know who we were really dealing with. That's where Tom Brennan came in. He was a private investigator, ex-state police, with a voice like gravel and a talent for finding the skeletons people tried hardest to hide. 3 days later, Tom slid into a booth at Rusty's Diner and dropped a manila folder in front of me. "Your HOA Queen Bee," he said, tapping the folder. "She's not Linda Greaves. Her real name's Brenda Kowalski. Changed it in 2018 right after getting fired from Pinnacle Security for falsifying safety certifications. Before that, she was selling fake security clearances to anyone with cash until one of her cleared employees robbed his workplace blind." I opened the folder. The mugshot staring back at me was younger, hair shorter, but the eyes were the same cold marbles I'd seen in my orchard. That's not all, Tom said. 3 restraining orders from former co-workers, all describing the same HOA surveillance, harassment, false police reports, total control freak behavior. And you might want to sit down for this, the HOA treasurer, Martha Kowalski. That's her mother. I froze mid-page turn. You're telling me her mom is on the board? Tom nodded. Sweet old lady. Probably doesn't even know her daughter's been using her financial credentials to skim from the community fund. 34 grand gone over the last year and a half. Phantom invoices. Fake maintenance bills. I closed the folder, my mind racing. If this was true, and with Tom's track record, I didn't doubt it then Linda, or Brenda, or whatever she wanted to call herself, wasn't just a petty tyrant. She was a career criminal who'd found a gold mine in HOA leadership, and I had just decided I was going to shut her down for good. That night, I sat in the kitchen, staring at Tom Brennan's folder like it was a loaded weapon. Inside were documents that could blow Linda Brenda out of the water. Her fake name, her history of harassment, the embezzlement trail so clear you could follow it with your finger. But as damning as it all was, it still felt like holding a grenade without the pin pulled. If I wanted this to stick, I needed the one person who could turn that grenade into a precision strike, Martha Kowalski, Brenda's own mother. I'd seen Martha at HOA meetings small, soft-spoken, always knitting in the back while her daughter barked orders. She looked like the kind of woman who sent you home with a slice of pie, not the kind who knew she was enabling a felony. I took a deep breath and dialed her number. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice gentle but cautious. Mrs. Kowalski, this is Daniel Price. I need to talk to you about your daughter. Please, just hear me out before you hang up. There was a long silence. Mr. Price, if this is about those violations, I've told Linda she might be a little too forceful, but she doesn't listen to me anymore. It's not about the violations, I said quietly. It's about the fact that she's been stealing from the community fund, using your financial information to do it. The pause on the other end was so long I thought the line had gone dead. When she finally spoke, her voice was shaking. What are you talking about? I told her everything Tom had found. The name change, the fake security job, the embezzlement, the restraining orders. The part where her sweet knitting circle reputation had been used as a shield for her daughter's crimes. She listened in stunned silence, only breaking in to say, I wondered where she got the money for all that security equipment, and she told me she was consulting for other HOAs. By the time I finished, I could hear her quietly crying. I thought I was helping her get back on her feet, she whispered. I didn't know I was funding this. I didn't want to twist the knife, but I needed her help. Mrs. Kowalski, if you want this to stop, really stop, I need you to give me access to the HOA's financial records. We can prove what she's been doing. And we can stop her before she ruins more families. The silence stretched again. Then, her voice grew stronger. You're right. I've been making excuses for her for years, but this has gone too far. Tell me what you need me to do. By midnight, we had a plan. Martha would quietly copy the HOA's records for the last 2 years. Marcus and I would use the data to match her fake invoices to the embezzled funds. And if all went well, we'd have a package so airtight the sheriff himself couldn't bury it. But Linda must have smelled trouble in the air, because the very next morning, she escalated. I was making breakfast when Josh came running in. Dad, there's a cop in our driveway taking pictures of the house. I stepped outside and froze. Standing there with a camera the size of a lunchbox was a stocky man in a Navy uniform, complete with a shiny badge on his chest. Next to him was Linda, pointing at my garden beds and the orchard like a real estate agent showing off a fixer-upper. The man noticed me and squared his shoulders. Sir, I'm Chief Security Officer Travis Hammer with the Coyote Ridge HOA Enforcement Division. We're conducting a security assessment for potential violations. I looked closer. The badge was generic, with HOA police printed on what looked suspiciously like label maker tape. His uniform was a mashup of surplus tactical gear and khaki cargo pants, and the patrol car parked at the curb was a decommissioned Crown Vic painted to look like a police cruiser, complete with a light bar. Mr. Hammer, I said, last I checked, HOAs in Arizona don't have police powers. What agency exactly employs you? Linda stepped forward before he could answer, her voice smug as ever. The HOA has contracted Hammer Security Services to enforce compliance. Officer Hammer has full authority to investigate violations and issue citations. Travis puffed his chest like a bantam rooster, but I saw the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. 3 days later, that rooster nearly cost someone their life. Marcus called me in a fury. Dan, they blocked my grandmother's ambulance. Edna had been having chest pains. Marcus called 911. But when the ambulance tried to reach their house, Travis had parked his fake cruiser across the narrow street and refused to move, demanding proper HOA transport permits. The paramedics had to park 2 blocks away and haul the stretcher on foot. Edna was lucky she survived the delay. I don't remember my exact words to Marcus, but they ended with, "They've crossed a line." When Linda announced an emergency community safety meeting that evening, I made sure to be there. The room was packed more people than I'd ever seen at one of these HOA dog and pony shows. Linda stood at the front with Travis looming behind her. She clicked through a PowerPoint presentation filled with grainy surveillance photos, my kids playing in the yard, me working in the orchard, all labeled as security concerns. Then she made her biggest mistake yet. From the back row, Judge Patricia Monroe stood up. She's a county court judge with the kind of presence that makes lawyers sweat, Ms. Greaves, she said evenly, what legal authority do you have to conduct surveillance on private citizens and obstruct emergency medical services? Travis stepped forward. Ma'am, HOA security has broad powers under community covenant enforcement protocols. Patricia cut him off with a smile that could strip paint. Mr. Hammer, impersonating a police officer is a third-degree felony in Arizona, punishable by up to 10 years. Would you like to explain your training and certification? The room went dead quiet. Travis went pale. Linda started to speak, but Patricia held up her hand. Furthermore, blocking an ambulance is a federal crime. I suggest you both get lawyers. For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw something in Linda's face I'd never seen before. Fear. And I knew this was far from over. But the tide was starting to turn. When I walked home from that HOA meeting, the air in the neighborhood felt different. It wasn't exactly friendly, not yet, but there was a shift I could sense in people's eyes. Folks who had been avoiding me for months weren't ducking behind fences or crossing the street anymore. Some even gave me a quick nod as I passed. The fear Linda had spent years cultivating was starting to crack, and the humiliation Patricia Monroe handed her in public had wedged that crack open. But if I've learned anything about people like Linda Greaves, it's this: they don't fold when cornered. They flail, they lash out, and when they're desperate, they can get dangerous. The very next morning, I woke up to find a strip of yellow tape stretched across my driveway. Not the professional kind you'd see at a real crime scene, but the cheap hardware store variety. Across it, in thick black marker, were the words "Crime Scene, Sheriff Greaves, Investigation, Do Not Enter." If her goal was to intimidate me, she failed, honestly. I stood there laughing for a good 30 seconds. The tape was crooked. The handwriting looked like it had been scrawled by a bored middle schooler, and she'd actually written sheriff in quotes, like even she didn't believe it. Still, the message was clear: she wasn't retreating. If anything, she was going to escalate. And when people like Linda escalate, they also make mistakes. I was counting on that. 2 weeks later, I decided it was time to change the conversation. Instead of waiting for Linda to strike again, I wanted to show the neighborhood who I really was. I organized an open garden day at my property, a tradition Claire had dreamed of back when the orchard was just saplings. She used to imagine kids running between the peach trees, learning about compost, picking tomatoes straight from the vine. I figured if neighbors could see what Claire had started, they'd know I wasn't the villain Linda made me out to be. The morning was perfect for it: blue skies, a light breeze, the smell of basil and rosemary drifting through the air. By 10 a.m., 15 families had shown up. Kids darted between rows of green beans and marigolds while parents sipped lemonade and made polite small talk. I set up a table with baskets of fresh peaches and jars of homemade jam, and, for the first time in a long time, the property felt alive. Deputy Alvarez arrived with his 8-year-old son, Mateo, whose curiosity burned hotter than the Arizona sun. He peppered me with questions. Why do you plant marigolds next to tomatoes? What's the difference between compost and mulch? Do earthworms really help the plants grow? I answered them all with a grin, loving every second. For a little while, I forgot about Linda entirely. Then Mateo's attention snagged on the old chicken coop at the far end of the property. Claire had built it years ago during her brief chicken-keeping experiment, but we'd repurposed the structure as a trellis for climbing beans after the noise of the neighborhood spooked the hens into early retirement. The wooden frame was still there, peaked roof, weathered beams, about 8 feet tall. "Mr. Price, can I climb up there to take pictures of the whole garden for my school project?" Mateo asked. Eyes bright. I hesitated. The beams were old, sun-bleached, and not exactly engineered for human weight. But Mateo was careful, and his dad was right there. I gave him the green light, with a warning. "Just don't go higher than you can climb down safely." I wish I'd said no. Mateo had just reached about 6 feet when the sharp crack of splitting wood cut through the air. Time slowed. The main beam gave way, sending the top of the structure collapsing sideways. Mateo dropped with it, disappearing into a tangle of wood, chicken wire, and bean vines. The sound of his cry was enough to stop every conversation cold. Alvarez was at his son's side in an instant, kneeling in the dirt. I rushed over and saw the damage. Mateo's leg bent at an unnatural angle, his chest rising shallow and uneven. "Don't move him," Alvarez barked, his training as a deputy snapping into place. Possible spinal injury, possible internal bleeding. I was already pulling out my phone. The 911 operator picked up on the first ring. I explained the situation, my voice tight, and she didn't waste words. Flight for Life is dispatching a UH-60 Blackhawk, ETA, 7 minutes. Clear a 100-foot square landing zone immediately. Remove anything that could become airborne in the rotor wash. The crowd scattered. Parents grabbed buckets, tools, folding chairs, anything that could be blown into the air. A couple of the dads started moving parked cars out of the field. I ran to clear a section of grass at the far end of the orchard. Back near the fallen coop, Alvarez was talking to Mateo in a low, steady voice. "Stay with me, buddy. Remember those peaches you wanted to pick next week? You still owe me a peach pie." Remember, I could hear the faint whump, whump, whump of the helicopter's rotors before I could see it. When it came into view, skimming over the rooftops, I felt a surge of relief. We had a clear patch. The medics would land, and Mateo would get the care he needed. That's when Linda arrived. She emerged from behind the barn, visor clamped to her head, clipboard in one hand and something shiny in the other. She strode straight into the middle of the landing zone, hair whipping wildly in the rotor wash, and planted her feet like she was blocking a runaway train. "Unauthorized medical flights require HOA permits," she shouted, her voice somehow managing to cut through the deafening thrum. "Land that helicopter, and you'll be arrested for illegal air traffic violations." The pilot veered off, banking hard to circle for another approach. Alvarez's head snapped up. "Linda, move! My son is dying!" She didn't flinch. She raised her shiny badge high, the same $12.99 fake from Amazon she'd flashed at the meeting, and bellowed, "Sheriff Greaves, HOA Enforcement Division. This is an airspace violation." Something in me broke right then. I yanked my phone from my pocket, opened Facebook, and hit go live. "This is Linda Greaves," I told the camera, pointing straight at her, blocking a rescue helicopter from landing to save an injured child. Within seconds, other parents around me had their phones up too. Comments poured in. Save Mateo started trending in the live chat. The Blackhawk made a SIND approach, dropping lower. Linda stepped forward again, directly into its path. The pilot had no choice but to pull up. Behind me, Mateo's breathing was shallow, his lips tinged blue. Alvarez started rescue breathing, his face tight with panic but his hand steady. I could see sweat pouring down his temples despite the cool wash of air from the helicopter blades. Then the pilot's voice came over the radio, loud enough for all of us to hear civilian interference with a medical emergency, requesting activation of Federal Obstruction Protocol. The dispatcher didn't hesitate. SWAT deployment authorized. Units inbound. Somewhere in the distance, faint at first, came the rising wail of sirens. Linda's head swiveled, and for the first time, I saw uncertainty flash across her face. Maybe it was the phones pointed at her from every angle. Maybe it was the parents screaming for her to get out of the way. Or maybe it was the realization that she'd just turned herself into a viral villain in real time. But she didn't move. The Blackhawk banked away again, waiting for clearance it wasn't going to get until someone physically removed her from the zone. Alvarez kept working on Mateo, his voice hoarse from shouting over the noise. The smell of jet fuel hung heavy in the air, and then the sirens got louder. Black armored vehicles rolled into view, their tires kicking up dust. The lead SUV bristled with antennas, lights flashing red and blue. In seconds, they were on the property, doors swinging open, agents in full tactical gear fanning out like a scene from an action movie. Linda still stood there, visor askew, badge in hand, shouting something about constitutional rights and community airspace. She had no idea her little kingdom was seconds away from collapse. And I had a front row seat. The black SUVs stopped in a perfect line, their doors bursting open in sync. The dust swirled around them as boots hit the ground. A dozen agents in tactical gear moved with military precision, rifles slung but ready, eyes locked on the woman standing in the middle of the landing zone like a deranged scarecrow. Leading them was a tall woman with a face carved from granite. Her name tag read Commander Torres, and even from 30 feet away, you could tell she wasn't the type to raise her voice unless she meant it. "Ma'am," Torres called out over the rotor thump, her tone carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Step away from the landing zone immediately." But Linda wasn't done performing. She took one bold step closer to the helicopter, thrust her badge toward Torres, and shouted, "I am the duly elected sheriff of this community. You are parked in violation of HOA Regulation 12C. I demand to see your permits." The absurdity of the moment would have been comical if a child wasn't lying behind us. Struggling to breathe, Torres didn't blink. She flicked her fingers, and two agents closed in from either side. A third stepped forward to inspect Linda's badge. He held it up so everyone could see and then announced in a voice loud enough to carry over the helicopter, "This is a plastic cosplay badge purchased from Amazon for $12.99. Ma'am, you are not a law enforcement officer, and you are currently obstructing a federal medical emergency." A ripple of gasps swept through the crowd of parents, all still filming. You could see the moment Linda's face cracked, the smug mask faltering, replaced by something twitchy and uncertain. Still, she tried one more line, "I demand to speak to the manager of the FBI." That was it. The agents flanked her, lifted her neatly by the elbows, and pulled her out of the landing zone as she shrieked about her jurisdiction. The Blackhawk touched down in a controlled burst of rotor wash. The medics poured out, moving like a choreographed drill team. Within 60 seconds, they had Mateo stabilized on a gurney, oxygen mask in place, IVs running. Deputy Alvarez climbed into the chopper with his son, his face pale but set with grim relief. The helicopter lifted, banking hard toward the trauma center. The crowd clapped, some of them crying. But the show wasn't over. While Linda was being secured in the back of a federal transport SUV, Torres turned toward her team. "Proceed with warranted search of secondary site," she said into her radio. I frowned. Secondary site. That question answered itself when the SWAT convoy roared away from my property, heading toward the HOA clubhouse 3 miles down the road. Half the neighborhood followed in their own cars. Word spreading like wildfire, the feds were raiding Linda's HQ. When we arrived, Travis Hammer was out front, still wearing his knockoff police gear and leaning on his fake Crown Vic like it was a prize-winning horse. His expression said he had no clue what was coming. "Officer, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding," he began when Torres stepped out of the lead SUV. "Mr. Hammer," she cut in, eyeing him up and down. "You're under arrest for impersonating a law enforcement officer, interfering with emergency medical services, and about 15 other federal charges we'll go over downtown." The color drained from his face as agents cuffed him and marched him to a waiting vehicle. Then the clubhouse doors were breached. Within minutes, the scene coming out of that building had the crowd gasping. Down in the basement, the agents had found what looked like a war room for suburban surveillance. 20-plus monitors displayed live feeds from around the neighborhood living rooms, kitchens, bedrooms, kids doing homework, elderly residents making tea, all captured without permission. This wasn't just nosiness. Marcus murmured beside me, his own phone filming every second. This is industrial-grade spying. Each feed was labeled with a resident's name and a color code: green for compliant, yellow for troublemakers, red for priority targets. Agent Martinez from Cybercrimes appeared on Torres's radio. "We've got an AI facial recognition system here, tracking over 200 residents, license plate readers, predictive movement algorithms, full psychological profiles." Whoever set this up wasn't just running an HOA, they were running a Black Ops program. The crowd erupted in shocked chatter. I felt sick to my stomach thinking about Emily's face logged in some twisted database, and the discoveries kept coming. Behind a false wall, the agents found an arsenal that looked like it belonged to a small military unit: semi-automatic rifles, tactical vests embroidered with HOA enforcement, smoke grenades, even riot shields. "What in God's name were they planning?" I muttered. Beside me, Patricia Monroe's jaw was tight. Nothing good. But the real gut punch came when the feds cracked open a locked storage room and found rows of safety deposit boxes. Inside, $9 million in cash, labeled as community improvement funds. It was proof of what Tom Brennan had warned me. This wasn't just about control. It was about money. A lot of it. And Linda had been laundering it right under everyone's noses. When they finally wheeled out the hard drives and servers, I knew it was over for her. The reign of Sheriff Greaves had ended. But this wasn't just a takedown. It was the beginning of the reckoning. By the time the last of the agents filed out of the HOA clubhouse, the Arizona sun had dipped low enough to paint the parking lot in long orange shadows. But even with the day winding down, the energy in the air was electric. Neighbors who hadn't made eye contact in years were huddled together in small knots, swapping war stories about their own run-ins with Linda and Travis. Some laughed in disbelief. Others shook their heads in quiet anger. For years, Linda had ruled through isolation, keeping everyone too wary of each other to form real connections. Now, standing in that parking lot with the FBI methodically hauling out boxes of evidence, those invisible walls were finally crumbling. And then, through the crowd, I spotted Martha Kowalski. She looked smaller than I remembered from the HOA meetings, thinner, her shoulders slightly hunched, as if she'd been carrying a weight for too long. But her eyes, they were different. Gone was the vague, distracted softness I'd seen when she'd sat knitting in the back of those meetings. Tonight, they were sharp, clear, and wet with unshed tears. Clutched against her chest was a small black external hard drive. Without hesitating, she walked straight past the gossiping neighbors, past the armed agents, and stopped in front of Commander Torres. Her voice was steady, but low. 8 terabytes of financial records. She said, every transaction, every false invoice, every penny Brenda stole from this community and from me. Torres studied her for a moment. "You understand this will be entered as evidence in federal court." Martha gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "I do. She's my daughter, Commander, but she's sick. I've spent years telling myself she'd get better if I just kept supporting her. All I did was give her more rope to hang herself and everyone else." Her jaw tightened. "That stops now." You could feel the air shift. The people closest to them had gone silent, watching this tiny woman, the mother of the so-called Sheriff Greaves, sever the last tie of loyalty in public. Even the agents paused for a second, as if they knew this was more than just the handover of a hard drive. It was a breaking point. Torres took the drive carefully. "You've done the right thing, Mrs. Kowalski, for the community and for yourself." While the data team began tagging and cataloging Martha's evidence, more discoveries spilled out of the clubhouse basement. One of the agents emerged carrying a large black binder labeled in neat block letters, "Operation Clean Sweep." He laid it open on the hood of a car for Torres to see. From where I stood, I could read some of the pages. Each one was a dossier on a different family in the neighborhood: names, photos, home addresses, work schedules, personal details. There were bullet points outlining their weaknesses, illnesses, marital problems, financial struggles, and beneath that, escalation strategies fabricated violations, anonymous complaint calls, staged security incidents to justify HOA intervention. 47 families were listed, and there, at the very top of the stack, was my page. In bold red letters, it read, "Primary objective: apply maximum psychological pressure, leverage family vulnerabilities, target during emotional low points for highest effectiveness." There were notes about Claire's passing, the orchard, even Emily's shyness at school. They'd turned the most personal, painful parts of my life into ammunition. I felt my hands clench so tightly that my nails bit into my palms. Patricia Monroe, standing beside me, caught sight of my face and touched my arm. "This is exactly why they're going to prison," she murmured. Torres moved from the binder to the hard drives the cybercrimes unit had pulled from the server room. One of her tech agents gave a low whistle. "Commander, this network is tied to at least 20 other HOAs across 3 states. Same surveillance protocols, same financial shell games. Looks like they've been laundering money for years." I stepped closer. "So you're saying there are more Lindas out there plenty?" Torres replied grimly. "But yours was one of the worst. And thanks to your live stream and your friend's drone footage, we've got a case here that's going to make an example out of them." Across the lot, I caught sight of Linda herself. She was seated in the back of a federal transport van, her hands cuffed in front of her, hair plastered from the earlier rotor wash. The visor was gone, and so was the smug expression she'd worn like armor for years. Her mouth still moved, probably hurling accusations or conspiracies at anyone who'd listen, but no one was paying attention. I wondered if she realized yet that she wasn't going home. This wasn't going to be a slap on the wrist from a friendly local official. She was heading into the federal system, where political connections and fake badges don't mean a thing. Travis, for his part, was already gone. I'd overheard an agent say he'd spent the entire ride to the station insisting that HOA authority supersedes federal jurisdiction. If there's a man less suited to life behind bars, I haven't met him. By the time the last box of evidence was loaded into unmarked trucks, the crowd still hadn't dispersed. People milled about, making plans to meet for coffee or check in on each other. You could almost see the old neighborhood bonds knitting themselves back together in real time. That was when Patricia found me leaning against my truck. "You realize," she said with that sly, lawyerly smile, "they're going to start looking to you now. You were the one who stood up first. People remember that." I shook my head. "They don't need a leader. They just need to start looking out for each other again." Patricia's eyes softened. "Exactly. And you reminded them how to do it." She paused, then added with a smirk, "Also, it's not a bad thing to have a judge as your +1 at block parties." I chuckled. "I'll keep that in mind." As the last agents rolled out, taking Linda and her empire with them, I stayed behind for a minute longer. The clubhouse, once her fortress, sat dark and empty, its windows reflecting the fading light. On the drive home, I passed the orchard. The low sun lit the peach trees in a warm, golden glow, each leaf backlit like a tiny lantern. For the first time in months, I didn't scan the branches for hidden cameras. The only eyes on this property now were the kind Claire had imagined: neighbors, friends, and family. The war, Torres had warned me, wasn't over. If this network was as big as they thought, there were plenty more battles ahead. But here, in Coyote Ridge, we'd won the biggest fight. And Linda Greaves, fake sheriff, HOA tyrant, and career con artist, was never coming back. I tightened my grip on the wheel and allowed myself a smile. Tomorrow, I'd go back to tending the orchard, back to the promises I'd made to Claire. But tonight, I'd let myself enjoy something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. The next morning, the peace I'd fallen asleep to still hung in the air, but it felt delicate, like the stillness after a violent summer monsoon, when the clouds haven't quite decided if they're done with you yet. The orchard was drenched in soft gold from the sunrise, dew clinging to every peach leaf, and for a second, I could almost believe the whole thing had been a bad dream. No HOAs, no fake sheriffs, no helicopters circling because a child couldn't breathe. But reality doesn't like to stay quiet for long. At exactly 7:12 a.m., my phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Marcus Turn on Channel 4. "Right now." Still half asleep, I shuffled into the living room, clutching my coffee like it was the only thing keeping me vertical. I clicked on the TV, and there she was, Linda Greaves, in a bright orange jumpsuit, her hands cuffed in front of her, being walked into federal court by two U.S. Marshals. The visor, the clipboard, the smug expression all gone. Her hair hung limp, and her eyes darted nervously toward the cameras lining the courthouse steps. The news anchor's voice was calm, almost clinical. Former Coyote Ridge HOA president, also known by her legal name, Brenda Kowalski, faces 25 federal charges, including racketeering, wire fraud, money laundering, unlawful surveillance, and obstruction of emergency medical services. Investigators allege she was the ringleader of a multi-state scheme that defrauded homeowners of more than $50 million over the last 8 years. $50 million. I knew she'd been stealing, but hearing that number out loud made my stomach knot. And it wasn't just from us, this was bigger than I dared to imagine. The segment cut to footage from the raid my Facebook live feed stitched together with SWAT body cam footage. The chopper finally landing, agents hauling boxes of cash and computers out of the HOA clubhouse, Travis being shoved into the back of a federal van in his fake police gear. It was surreal watching it, as if I were just another viewer. Then, an image I'd never seen before appeared. Commander Torres at a press conference, standing at a podium, flanked by two FBI agents in suits. She spoke clearly, with the calm weight of someone who knew the scope of what they'd just accomplished. This operation dismantled one of the most organized and predatory HOA fraud networks in the country, and it started because one resident had the courage to speak up, document everything, and refuse to be intimidated. I froze. She was talking about me. I don't blush easily, but I'll admit I stood there in my living room, coffee halfway to my lips, feeling my ears burn. By the time the segment ended, my phone was a brick of notifications. Messages from people I knew, people I hadn't heard from in years, and a surprising number from numbers I didn't recognize. Some were reporters wanting quotes. Others were complete strangers from other states, telling me they were dealing with their own Linda and asking how I'd managed to beat mine. One text in particular stopped me. "We've been living under this same kind of harassment for years. Your story gives us hope. Thank you." It hit me harder than I expected. For months, I'd been fighting to protect my kids, my late wife's orchard, and my own sanity. Now I was realizing the fight had ripples people were watching, and maybe, just maybe, it meant they could fight back too. I stepped outside to clear my head. The air still held the cool bite of early morning. Josh and Emily were already in the orchard, racing each other between the rows of peach trees, their laughter echoing. For the first time in what felt like forever, it was just laughter, no glances over shoulders, no sudden freezes at the sound of a car slowing near the house. Halfway down the row, I spotted Patricia Monroe leaning against the fence. She'd traded her judge's robes for a wide-brimmed straw hat and jeans, but she still carried herself with the same quiet authority that could make a room fall silent. "You made the news," she said with a wry smile. Twice, actually. Once as the hero who brought down a criminal HOA president, and once in a segment about how to recognize signs of HOA abuse. I shook my head, still a little dazed. "I didn't do it for headlines." "I know," she said. "That's exactly why it matters." She let that hang for a moment before adding, "But you also need to understand you're not done." I frowned. "Not done." She stepped closer, resting her arms on the fence. Torres told me last night they have evidence of at least 23 other communities with the same kind of setup: hidden surveillance, harassment, fake violations. People are going to look to you, Daniel, not just here, everywhere. The thought was both flattering and exhausting. "Patricia, I'm just a guy who grows peaches and fixes broken irrigation lines." She tilted her head, a smirk tugging at her lips, "and takes down a multi-state criminal empire in his spare time." I laughed despite myself. That was situational. Her smirk softened into something more serious. Situations have a way of finding the people who can handle them. And whether you like it or not, you've just been volunteered. That night, after the kids were asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen. I wasn't sure why at first. Maybe it was just the leftover adrenaline, or maybe it was Patricia's words echoing in my head. I started jotting ideas, a neighborhood association built on cooperation, not control. Workshops on homeowners' rights, a network for people to share resources and advice on fighting abusive HOAs. Templates for legal letters, so no one would have to face these bullies unarmed. It felt ambitious, even a little crazy. But as I wrote, I kept hearing Claire's voice from the first spring we planted the orchard. You don't grow something this big just for yourself. You grow it so everyone can share in the harvest. By the time midnight rolled around, I had a rough outline of a plan. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. And for the first time since the day Linda Greaves marched across my lawn with her clipboard, I wasn't thinking about defense. I was thinking about building, about making sure no one else would have to go through what we did. The war in Coyote Ridge was over, but I knew deep down my fight was just beginning. 2 days after sketching out my late-night plan, the first test came sooner than I expected. I was tightening a loose irrigation valve in the orchard when Marcus showed up, holding his phone like it was a live grenade. "You're not going to believe this," he said, handing it to me. On the screen was a Facebook group post from a town I'd never heard of in New Mexico. The photo at the top was painfully familiar, a grainy zoom shot of someone's front yard, complete with red circles and arrows marking violations. The caption read, "We're cracking down. All non-compliant yards will face fines or legal action." And the woman who posted it, she was wearing the same smug expression I'd seen on Linda 100 times, right down to the clipboard and weaponized smile. "Her name's Carla," Marcus said. "My cousin lives in that neighborhood. Says she's got cameras in half the houses already." I stared at the photo. Different state, different face, same playbook. That night, I called Patricia. "What do you know about HOAs in New Mexico?" She chuckled softly. "About as much as I know about peaches. Not a lot, but enough to be dangerous. I think I found another Linda," I told her. Within a week, I'd been on 3 Zoom calls with residents from other states, people living under their own versions of Coyote Ridge's nightmare. Stories poured in fines for wind chimes, threats over kids' bikes in the driveway, drones flying over backyards for compliance checks. One man from Colorado said their HOA president demanded to inspect inside people's homes for code compliance. Another from Nevada told me his board had literally padlocked his driveway gate while he was at work, trapping his wife and kids at home. Every single story felt like deja vu. It didn't take long before I realized my late-night notes weren't just theory anymore, they were a blueprint. The first step was building a central hub, a website where people could share their HOA horror stories, swap legal resources, and connect with others in their area. Marcus handled the tech side, setting up secure forums and encrypted messaging so folks wouldn't have to fear retaliation. Patricia began drafting plain English guides to state HOA laws, and I started writing up our own case, step by step, so others could see exactly how we'd built an evidence trail that even Linda couldn't squirm out of. The site went live on a quiet Tuesday morning. By Friday, we'd had over 2,000 visitors from 9 different states. Some were just curious. Others were desperate. A few were angry enough to start their own paper trails immediately. One woman from Texas wrote, "Your story gave me the courage to put up my own security cameras. I caught our HOA president trespassing last night, taking photos through my kitchen window. I'm meeting with an attorney Monday." Reading that, I felt the same fierce satisfaction I'd felt the night SWAT rolled into Coyote Ridge. But not everyone was thrilled. 2 days after the site launched, a thick envelope landed in my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single typed page. "Mr. Price, you have inserted yourself into matters that do not concern you. Shut down your site or face legal consequences. We will not tolerate your interference." No signature, no letterhead, just the kind of vague, blustery threat that sounded all too familiar. When I showed it to Patricia, she smirked. "Congratulations. You've made the right enemies. We didn't take it down. If anything." Marcus doubled the site's security and added a wall of shame section where users could post redacted versions of harassment letters they'd received from their HOAs. It blew up overnight. Turns out, nothing unites people faster than shared indignation. Meanwhile, Life in Coyote Ridge was settling into a rhythm I hadn't thought possible 6 months ago. Kids were riding bikes in the street again. Neighbors were planting whatever they wanted in their yards without worrying about measuring tape inspections. And the HOA free zone sign at the entrance had become a minor tourist attraction. People stopped to take pictures next to it like it was a landmark. One Saturday, while I was setting up for the farmer's market stand in the orchard, a man approached me, mid-50s, wiry build, wearing a ball cap pulled low. "You Price?" he asked. "That's me," I said cautiously. He stuck out his hand. "Name's Dennis. I'm from Ridgeview, Utah. Heard about what you did here. We've got our own problem worse. Maybe. Wondering if you'd come talk to some folks back home." I hesitated. Traveling to another state to help strangers wasn't exactly on my to-do list. But then I remembered the man from Nevada, the woman from Texas, the hundreds of people who'd sent messages saying they felt trapped. "All right," I said finally, "but I don't do this alone. If I come, I bring my team." Dennis grinned. "That's all we want." That night, I sat in the orchard with Marcus and Patricia, the three of us lit by a single hanging bulb strung between the peach trees. The kids had gone to bed hours ago. The air smelled faintly of rosemary from the herb garden, and the hum of crickets filled the silence between our words. "We've got a chance here," Patricia said, leaning forward. "What happened in Coyote Ridge can be a model, not just for Utah, but anywhere these HOA bullies operate." Marcus tapped the table. "We take it step by step. No heroics, no risks we can't manage. But we make it clear no one's untouchable." I looked at both of them, feeling that same steady determination I'd felt the day I pulled Emily's window camera out of the oak tree. Linda's empire was gone, but the fight was bigger now, and I was ready. 3 weeks later, we were on the road. Marcus drove his old Ford F-250 with me riding shotgun, a laptop balanced on my knees, and Patricia following in her SUV with boxes of legal templates, HOA bylaws, and copies of the evidence binders from Coyote Ridge. The trip to Ridgeview, Utah, was 9 hours of open desert and occasional bursts of green farmland, plenty of time for me to wonder what exactly we were walking into. Dennis had been vague on the phone. "It's bad," he'd said, "but folks are scared to talk unless they trust you." When we finally rolled into Ridgeview, the first thing I noticed was how polished everything looked, almost too polished. Every lawn was clipped to the same height, every mailbox identical. Not a single car sat in a driveway. They were all hidden away in garages. The streets were eerily quiet for a Saturday afternoon. We pulled up to Dennis's place, a modest single story with a front porch just big enough for 2 chairs. He ushered us inside quickly, like he didn't want the neighbors seeing us linger. In the living room, 6 other residents were waiting. They all looked uneasy glancing toward the curtained windows as if expecting someone to burst in. Patricia set her box of documents on the coffee table. "Let's start simple," she said. "Tell us what's been happening." The stories came fast. A woman fined $500 for hanging a wind chime visible from the street. A family threatened with eviction because their teenage son's pickup truck did not align with the community aesthetic. Security patrols photographing residents' backyards without permission. One man swore his HOA president had entered his home unannounced under the excuse of inspecting foundation stability. It was Coyote Ridge all over again, the intimidation, the overreach, the obsession with control. When Marcus asked about leadership, the room went quiet. Finally, a man named Paul leaned forward. "Our president's name is Robert Decker, retired military, runs the board like a boot camp. And he's got a security guy named Nolan who's unpredictable." That unpredictable part turned out to be an understatement. Later that evening, Dennis drove us past the HOA clubhouse, a 2-story brick building with dark-tinted windows. In front, a stocky man in tactical gear stood with his arms folded, scanning the street like a sentry. "That's Nolan," Dennis muttered. "He's been known to follow people home if they talk back at meetings." Patricia raised an eyebrow. "Private security claims he's community law enforcement." I didn't need to hear more. We'd seen this movie before, the fake authority, the intimidation, the culture of fear, and I knew exactly how it ended. The next day, We met with a small group of residents willing to be the core of our resistance. Step 1 was education. Patricia walked them through their state HOA statutes, highlighting every law Decker's board had been breaking. Marcus set up a secure group chat for communication, and I taught them how to discreetly document incidents, timestamps, photos, video, witness statements. Evidence is your armor. I told them, the moment you have enough of it, they can't hide behind intimidation anymore. Over the following week, we started getting messages, daily grainy photos of Nolan trespassing, audio recordings of Decker making threats, scans of HOA invoices with suspicious maintenance charges. It was the same pattern Linda had used, just with a different face and a different zip code. On our last night in Ridgeview, Dennis hosted a backyard barbecue for the small group. As the sun dipped behind the Wasatch Mountains, kids ran barefoot in the grass. Music played low from a portable speaker. And, for the first time since we'd arrived, I saw these people laugh without looking over their shoulders. This is what they're afraid of, Patricia said quietly beside me. Neighbors talking to each other, finding out they're not alone. I nodded. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. And once you can't unsee it, they've already lost. When we left the next morning, Dennis shook my hand with a grip that nearly broke my knuckles. "You've given us a fighting chance," he said. "We won't waste it." The drive home was long, but it felt different this time. We weren't just 3 people from a small Arizona town anymore. We were the start of something bigger. And somewhere out there, I knew Decker, Nolan, and every other petty dictator in a polo shirt could feel the ground shifting under their feet. They just didn't know yet how far the cracks would spread. 2 months after we left Ridgeview, the news broke. It started as a short blurb in the Utah state paper, Ridgeview HOA President Resigns Amid Investigation. By the following week, it had snowballed into nightly coverage. Robert Decker and his so-called security officer, Nolan, had been served with restraining orders, accused of multiple counts of trespassing, harassment, and misappropriation of HOA funds. The residents we'd met, Dennis, Paul, the woman with the wind chime fines, were sending us updates like proud students passing a final exam. They'd filed a collective complaint with the state's Department of Commerce, backed by over 200 pages of evidence. And when Decker tried to fight back in court, Patricia flew in to sit behind them in the hearing, her mere presence enough to make him stumble over his own words. Back home in Coyote Ridge, life had settled into something that almost felt like normal. Kids biked past without fear of being cited for reckless play. The orchard had its best peach yield in years, and the HOA free zone sign at the entrance now had a small bronze plaque beneath it, paid for by neighbors, in gratitude to those who stood up, spoke out, and set us free. One cool October evening, we held a harvest dinner in the orchard. Long tables stretched between the peach trees, strung with warm lights that swayed in the breeze. Neighbors brought dishes to share pecan pies, cornbread, roasted vegetables, Marcus grilled ribs, and Patricia showed up with a pitcher of her famous sweet tea. Halfway through the night, Emily climbed onto one of the tables, still in her overalls and boots, cheeks pink from running around with the other kids. "Daddy," she called. "Can I say something?" The crowd quieted. She looked out over the neighbors, her voice steady. "Thank you for helping my dad, and for making it so we don't have to be scared anymore." I felt something catch in my throat. I wasn't the only one. I saw more than a few neighbors wipe their eyes. Later, as the sun slipped behind the mountains and the air cooled, I stood at the edge of the orchard, watching everyone laugh, eat, and talk like old friends. For years, Linda's greatest weapon had been isolation, keeping us suspicious of one another, breaking our trust. Now the fences were down, both literally and in spirit. Patricia joined me, handing me a plate of cobbler. "You know," she said, "this could work anywhere. What we did here, in Ridgeview, there's no reason it can't keep spreading." I nodded slowly. "Then we keep going, until the Lindas, Deckers, and every other self-appointed tyrant realize they can't win." As the laughter of my neighbors carried through the orchard, I knew one thing for certain: we'd planted something bigger than peaches here, something that would outlast all of us. And no HOA on earth was ever going to rip it out by the roots again. If this whole journey taught me anything, it's that power only works when people are too afraid to push back. Linda's clipboard, Decker's security patrol, all their rules and fines, none of it was real authority. It was just intimidation dressed up as law. The moment we stood together, documented the truth, and refused to be silenced, their power crumbled like dry clay. You don't have to own a peach orchard or have friends in high places to make a difference. All you need is the courage to speak up, the patience to gather your proof, and the willingness to stand side by side with your neighbors. Bullies, whether they wear a fake badge or sit behind a boardroom table, only win if we let them. So, if you've been through something like this, share your story in the comments. If you believe in standing up to injustice, hit that like button and subscribe, not just to follow my journey, but to join a growing community that refuses to be pushed around. Because together, we're not just fighting back, we're taking back what's ours.